If you play for free at your church, you've probably told yourself one of three lies. And these lies aren't just keeping you broke, they're destroying an entire profession for musicians who actually need the income. So let's talk about it. I've been a church musician literally for over 3 decades, and I've heard every excuse in the book. But these three lies are the most dangerous because they sound spiritual. Now, I want to say off top that if you're a volunteer church musician, I'm not here to discourage you. If you like it, I love it for you. More power to you. But I do want to give you a bit of a reality check about what volunteer services actually mean. Because these lies, they didn't even come from you anyway. They came from church culture. And they've just been repeated so many times that musicians have just started to believe them themselves. So lie number one is, I don't want to make it about the money. The moment you bring up compensation or money, someone says, "Oh, I thought you were here for the right reasons. Don't make it about the money." I remember the first time I brought up my compensation and my pay to this pastor for the first time, he looked at me like I had robbed the offering plate or something. But I do get why people believe this lie, why they buy into this lie. And it's for a couple of reasons. And it's because they don't want to be, seen or viewed as a greedy or materialistic person. Because this is one of these things that church culture teaches against, right? You're not supposed to be about material things, and you're not supposed to be looking for wealth and all of that kind of stuff. And then another reason is that church culture spiritualizes poverty in a lot of ways. This is something a lot of people don't talk about. Like, to be poor and to not be wealthy and to not have money is, that means you're somehow a good person. You're doing the right things and the devil is just against you and all of this kind of stuff. But also you want to avoid being guilted for quote unquote serving for the wrong reasons. But here's the thing. It's already about the money. The church pays the electric bill. They pay the insurance bill. They pay the building maintenance. They pay staff salaries. Heck, they even pay for the coffee machine that's sitting in the lobby. They just don't want to pay you. Here's the thing. You can love serving and expect fair compensation for it. They want to guilt you into feeling bad about wanting to be paid for your services and for your effort, but they feel zero guilt for not paying you. And guess what? They budget for everything else without shame. Why? Because it's only unspiritual when it comes to paying musicians. When you accept this lie of, I don't want to make it about the money, you're teaching churches that they can exploit musicians indefinitely. And guess what else? You're enabling a system where music and music directors at churches get burnt out all of the time, and where talented musicians just leave church work altogether and start gigging and, doing secular work and all of that kind of stuff. We're seeing a rise of that. And you're enabling a system where only musicians who are independently of means and they have money are able to go work for the church. And then the profession dies because basically no one can afford to make a living doing it. And we wonder why church music and gospel music and CCM music is suffering. And let me tell you something. The church leader or pastor who tells you you shouldn't be making it about the money is getting a salary. But you're just supposed to do it for the love of Jesus or whatever. That's not ministry. That's manipulation dressed up as spiritual language. Now, lie number two is, it's a ministry and not a job. When you volunteer at church, you're told it's not a job, it's a ministry, and you shouldn't expect payment or compensation for what it is that you're doing or serving or whatever. And it's funny because I know of a church who literally cut their music department budget down to zero, like where nobody got paid. But they added a $75,000 per year staff position where they were paying someone that didn't even have anything at all to do with ministry. And I get why people believe this lie too, because it's one of the ones that really sounds spiritual and sacrificial. But also, church culture in a lot of ways is built around this whole serving versus working concept. But here's what they don't tell you: ministry and money are not opposites. Work and wages are not opposites. They never have been. When you accept this lie of it's a ministry and not a job, you're basically saying that any and everyone who works for or at the church, from pastors and leaders to accountants and secretaries, shouldn't be paid for what they do. But somehow they are. Why? Because the church budgets for what it values. And if the musicians, and if there's no money going into the music ministry at the church, it's not because it's not a ministry, it's because they don't value it or you. And here's the manipulation. They'll call it ministry when they're asking you to work for free. But when they're hiring a $100,000 a year pastor, they'll call that a job. You see the game? Now, lie number 3 is, I'm blessed to be able to serve. So you tell yourself that you're financially stable and you're blessed to be able to serve your church in this way. You know, I had a friend like this that was playing volunteer for a church, and he had a really good paying day job. So he was just volunteering his time and stuff for the church. But guess what happened? When he left the church because he had to move to a new city, they expected the new musician who came in to also volunteer and work for free. But guess what? This musician didn't have a good paying day job. His life, he had dedicated his entire life to church music and church ministry, and they didn't want to pay him. And honestly, this is another one I empathize with as well, because I understand that being financially stable gives you a sense of gratitude. And I understand that you want to express that gratitude, particularly in a world where so many people aren't financially stable and they're struggling. And also, there's a church culture around an obligation for people who are financially stable to actually give back and serve. But here's the truth. Your financial privilege is not a reason to work for free. It's actually a reason to demand fair pay and compensation from musicians who aren't as financially privileged and stable, so they can also be able to serve. The reality is, when you play for free because you quote unquote don't need the money, what you're doing is you're setting a standard for a system that excludes musicians that are single parents, just trying to make ends meet, or even young musicians who are paying off debt and student loans and all of that, but have a heart to serve. You're excluding anyone really in this time that we live in without a spouse and that has a second income in their household. Churches learn that they can get professional level musicians for no money, so they stop budgeting for it. And then when you can't do it anymore, they expect the next musician to come in to do it for free as well. And that's just not how things should work. So basically what you've done is you've created a system where only those who are financially privileged and stable can come in the church and serve as a musician. And it's funny because you think you're being humble, right? But what you're actually doing is you're making it impossible for musicians who love serving and who have a heart for music, who just need to pay their rent. You're making it hard for them to serve even in their own churches. Does that sound Christ-like to you? Here's what you need to hear. These lies don't just affect you. They shape the entire industry for church musicians. And if we don't change how we think about this, nothing changes. So really quickly, I want to give you 3 action steps that we all need to do. The first thing is we got to reframe our thinking when it comes to church musicians and pay. Your skill, your gift, how you use it is your choice. It comes down to you. That's what it's really about. But compensation doesn't make it less holy. It makes it sustainable. Number 2 is we have to start advocating for change. If you're financially stable and you can volunteer, or you are a volunteer musician at your church, use that privilege that you have to advocate for paid positions, for paid musicians. Tell your church leadership, the pastors and all of those people, you can serve for free, but you should budget for musicians who want to come in and who want to serve the church as well. And number 3, we gotta set boundaries. If you're asked to volunteer and you need the income, you can say things like, I'd love to serve in this capacity, but I need to be compensated for my time and for my skill, point blank, period. When does your budget, or what does your budget allow for this, for my compensation? You don't apologize for it. You don't explain. You just state your need. Look, I know this conversation may be a little uncomfortable, and you may be thinking, Terrence, yeah, I hear you, but all of that is a little complicated. I just love playing for my church. And I hear you. But here's the thing. Your love for playing for church, it doesn't pay you for rent. It doesn't pay for a music degree. It doesn't help get your kids through school. Volunteering can be a beautiful, wonderful thing, but poverty is not. And churches should never confuse the two. So stop believing the lies. Start demanding better. Start demanding pay for your time and what you do. And if your church won't pay you, find someone that will, because you deserve it. Now drop a comment below and let me know which of these lies, if any, you've bought into, or if there's other lies you know of. And if you're a church leader or a church watching this video, let us know what's keeping you from budgeting for your musicians if you haven't already. Your voice matters here too. And your comment could be the one that pushes churches to do right by their musicians. I'll see you in the next video.